All right, man. Welcome to the intro for Crrow777 Radio episode, where are we, 73? This is the intro. I might have said that twice. Jason and I take apart the Red Cross. Jason and I take apart weather manipulation. There is no argument. You know, back when I was filming chemtrails in San Diego for thousands of hours, my mind was on the drought in California, mostly, and we don't really have hurricanes in San Diego. It was far from my mind, but as I got back into the research to try to show it is possible to create massive storms with weather manipulation, it all came flooding back to me. I reread documents like the Air Force document owning the weather by 2025. Weather manipulation's been going on for well over 100 years, probably a lot longer. At the base of it, it is the most basic alchemical principle of transmuting water into air. Of course, there's more to it, but this has been going on for a long, long time, probably pre what we call the Industrial Revolution. As for the charities, Jason and I were noticing that there was a full frontal press to collect money, nationally, internationally, and we started looking at these things. They ran a celebrity, all the A-list celebrities in Hollywood, which is what I open up with, breaking it down, man. They're fleecing people. Places like the Red Cross, it's a wonder they're even allowed to exist with the track record that we can look up of what they've done. But we connect these charities to the Rothschilds, and it's the same old game. If you want to help people who have been devastated, go local. Don't give to these damn charities. That's my point of view. But anyhow, I got a lot of reports from followers and subscribers from both Florida, and as people who follow know, we had some eyewitnesses on the ground in Houston. We're getting a lot of reports that there is a bit of a police state activity where they're blocking off exits. They're not allowing people back into their county. They're demanding papers. Some people aren't clear whether you're looking at National Guard or something else. We've got reports of military assets being brought into places, and we have reports of laws possibly being changed so that police can use military assets. All of these things are going to we're going to need to look at them more carefully. We're just getting initial reports right now, but I figured I would mention it as more, I've had at least 3 people from Houston talk about this, and a couple from the Tampa area in Florida talk about this. As for Florida, I've had 5 reports from people who lived there who said the storm wasn't that bad. Most of that was from the northern part of Florida, so we're waiting to hear more, but their impression where they were was that the fear porn on the news channels was out of hand and did not reflect what they saw. I'm almost certain there are people in other parts of Florida who may have different things to report. As we jump in here, I'm going to take apart this ridiculous celebrity push for money that came 2 nights ago, called Hand in Hand 2017. I'm going to break that down first thing here. These things are beyond suspicious when you look at them, and when you dig in, you begin to realize, in the same old game, words have meaning. At the very end of that episode, there was a logo for one of the production companies that helped put this together called Den of Thieves. If words have meaning, so do names. I look them up, I talk about them. So the first 9 minutes here, we're going to take apart the celebrity nonsense where they're fleecing America for money, and from my point of view, I will add. But anyhow, let's jump in with Jason. We cover a hell of a lot here, and there is no argument. There is no argument. Weather manipulation has been going on for at least 100 years, actually over 100 years. And there is no argument about these charities. Their track records alone show what they have been up to. But when you begin to dig into who's doing it, the obfuscated, who owns what, who's involved, their mission statements, man, if you want to help people, go direct. These charities are not what they seem, and they're owned by the same old banksters, a lot of them. I can't really speak for the Hollywood push because it's almost completely hidden who owns that stuff. Anyhow, the website was set up on 9/1. I cover all this. Let's jump in with Jason. All right, man. Welcome to Crrow777 Radio Podcast. This is episode 73. I have Jason Lindgren with me, and we're going to have quite a show here. It's probably going to go long if I had to guess. We're going to take apart weather manipulation, the absurdity of all the stuff that has just happened around the storms, Harvey and Irma. We're going to open up here. Last night on television, they had a hand-in-hand celebrities raise money thing going on, and I took a look at it, so I reported it. Tried to get through most of it this morning, and I'll tell you, man. But before we jump in, welcome, Jason.
Stormy roads ahead, Crow.
Yeah, man. It's September is just become one hell of a month for our world, particularly us here in the United States. Did you have a chance to see any of this hand-in-hand 2017 nonsense?
Yes, I did. I took a look at a couple of the clips, and I kept seeing the same theme being repeated on it. Well, the first thing I noticed was the hand-in-hand thing looked awful lot like a Freemasonic handshake, but I'm not sure if it's exactly mimicking one. I didn't have a chance to look that up, but folks out there can take a look and see if that's the case or not. But I watched a bunch of clips from different people, all these celebrities, and Beyonce, she mentioned that violence and racism, just are rampant now. That was like the first things out of her mouth. Selena Gomez did the exact same thing, bringing up racism. And then Justin Bieber looked absolutely ridiculous in this outfit that...
Right.
I don't even know.
Strange. He acted strange, too.
Yeah, he seemed almost zombie-ish.
Yeah, it looked like the last place on planet Earth he wanted to be was there. Bruce Willis does a stare into the camera at one point that almost translates to "help me, get me the F out of here." Not even bothering to fake like he's talking to anyone on the phone. But you brought up a good point. The logo for Hand in Hand 2017 is not hand in hand at all. The whole thing is supposedly based on an image which they show a human chain supposedly going out to rescue someone in a truck. I didn't have time to really dig into it. I guess there is some handheld cell phone video of the supposed event, but again, I didn't dig into it. But it's not hand in hand at all. They're doing the whole wrist thing, and I'm with you. We need to look in and see if it's Masonic. But as I've said so endlessly on this show, words have meanings. Stages are put in place to show the audience exactly what they are to see. They are contrivances. They are planned events. What you are not meant to see, you will not see, particularly if it's filmed, because anything that might slip in a live show will be edited out in post. But let me just jump in for a second and talk a little bit about a few of the things I noticed about Hand in Hand. And just for the listening audience, the reason we're bringing this up is because no disaster goes to waste with these people. They're fleecing the public, absolutely fleecing the public, everyone who donates to places like the Red Cross. And we're going to get into these things along with the fact that weather is manufactured. And there's no arguing it either, by the way. And of course, global warming is going to play into this. I'll do a Stevie Wonder quote at the end of this little run. But anyhow, here's a strange thing. A couple days ago, I looked up Harvey to see what the listed dates were. And they listed it, I think as late as yesterday on Google, as having been from August 25th to August 29th. Of course, 29 encodes 9/11. This morning when I re-looked it up, they've changed the dates. Now they're listing it as having occurred from August 25 to September 2nd. But here's the rub. I saw the hand-in-hand 2017.com thing, so I got my butt up, re-logged on, and went to Whois and ICANN to do some lookups on the site creation. The site for this event was created on September 1. So if we took the August 29 as the original posting, as August 29 is the end date of Harvey, maybe you could call it 3 days later, they had this website set up. But here's the rub. It was created on September 1, and then a second later was the last update listed through ICANN and Whois. So 2 to 3 days after supposedly the impact of Harvey is felt, they have this site up, and they have I think it's over 100, don't quote me, it's around 100 celebrities listed on the initial posting of the website, which is never updated again as far as I can tell, but I've only had one run at this. Site ownership is hidden. You cannot tell who owns it, of course, but the whole event is being under the aegises of Comedy Relief. I kid you not. Words have meaning. I don't know where the comedy comes from, and I know people are going to comment that there are comedians that supposedly go out to do relief. I think Whoopi Goldberg and maybe Robin Williams were some of the first to do that. I don't remember exactly. Point is this event for these supposed hurricane disasters is under the aegises of comedy relief, and I will maintain to the day I drop, words have meaning. So when you go and you look at some of the footage here, it appears as if the celebrities are not talking to anyone on the phone, but here's one example to prove that it's staged. Seacrest is walking down, celebrities are supposedly talking on the phone, and he starts talking with them, and they just stop talking on the phone, but he gets to a basketball guy, and the basketball guy just happens to be ending his call as Seacrest comes up to him, and they get into this whole back and forth how the Owners Association for Basketball are giving all these gazillions of dollars, and any basketball player that wants to give up to $20,000 will be matched. Clearly a staged conversation. You can go back and look at this. But at the very end of the show, I'm going to jump out of sequence here for a minute. At the very end of the show, I noticed they flashed the logo at the bottom of the page for about 2 seconds. As I had recorded it, I went back to discover that the logo they flashed it's a company called Den of Thieves. Words have meaning. So, of course, I jumped in to discover who Den of Thieves are, having located the logo online. And here is their little about page, what they're about. Den of Thieves, the people who were, I guess, helping produce this, states this about their company. We're the leading studio helping marketers develop craft, that's right, I said it, craft, and deliver results-driven branded content using the entertainment potential in their brands to achieve business goals. This is an exact one-to-one allegory about what went on with all these celebrities. But anyhow, let me just finish up here real quick. Stevie Wonder opens this shindig by telling people that global warming is real, which you can tell by the storms that just happened, and the only people who don't understand this are either blind or unintelligent. Well, even though I know Stevie Wonder was reading from a script, which isn't exactly accurate in his case, the only blind person there was Stevie Wonder. Global warming is a fraud, and this kind of opening of this event begins to tell the tale of how these storms, weather manipulation, and all these other things are going to go hand in hand with the completely made-up global warming idea. And as a side idea, I started to look up some of the water temperatures around the 2 storms we just had. In a lot of places, they're listing that it was 2 degrees below average. Not only that, they had MSNBC news anchors come on this show last night, along with Matt Lauer, to tell us this is the worst recorded storm on record, which is also a lie. There are accounts back to the 1800s of storms that would rival or match this, both in numbers and severity. All right. I went into the source code on the website page to see if I could discover anything else about it, but one thing that really struck me is stated on the website is that 100% of the money collected will benefit charities. I'm not kidding, man. Not victims, not the people who lost their homes or were put underwater or lost everything they had. The stated path of everything collected by this event, Hand in Hand 2017, is going to benefit charities, and that bears some consideration. They open the show by stating it's happening 18 days after the event, referring to Harvey, and that's a bit weird because that would put it around the 26th, which doesn't coincide with any date that matters if you look in a search engine. Of course, 18 encoding the 666. Now, as the last side note before I jump in with Jason, I record randomly certain things during the week because the television tells the tale about what's happening in our world. There was a new commercial running a thing about Harvey windows. Never saw it before. It was brand new. Man gets into a boat, of course, the maritime idea, goes out to a lighthouse and installs a Harvey window. For those that are mildly aware, they understand this is the whole illuminated Luciferian idea going on, and they're blaring the idea of Harvey in your face again. But anyhow, Jason, anything you want to add on the tail of that, or any impressions from having reviewed any of it before we jump in here?
A lot of these people like when you see them doing this stuff, they have very dead eyes, I noticed. Like Beyonce really stood out to me. So whatever's really going on with these celebrities, you know, they may have all the money in the world to have this beautiful physical life. It seems that it's coming at a very, very heavy price, and, you know, make of that as you will.
Spot on, man. They're assets. In the research I did around Hand in Hand 2017, this entertainment fraud that benefits 100% benefits charities. You would have to do a lot of work to try to discover all the charities where it's actually going. You know, but before I get into, well, I'll finish what I was going to say. These people are assets. It said on the site that none of the celebrities were being paid. They were all volunteering. I would imagine the way that goes down is the phone rings and someone says, get your ass here on this day. And if you think about 100 A-list celebrities being brought together this quickly, normally you're told if you want to get 5 or 6 A-list celebrities together, there's scheduling problems out the yinger. But I'll set all this aside. I had a family member when I was in San Diego years ago who went to work for a supposed charity. It was one of these places that collected for like 100 charities. They came to discover during the course of collecting for these charities that in California, the state law provided that the place collecting the money could keep 90-some%. I forget what it was, 4, maybe 5% was actually going anywhere near a charity. And then, of course, the charity takes its cuts before supposedly anyone gets out to people. I would just say, Jason and I are getting ready to take apart the Red Cross. We had heard lots of stuff about it, and I don't really make comment until I've had a chance to look. These places are a fraud, man. That's all there is to it. If you want to help people who have been put underwater or lost their homes, you need to get local. You need to get right in to the neighborhoods and the counties that are doing things and discover who is actually helping these people. Because these entertainers that go in and hold your mind, it ain't them. The Red Cross has a track record that it bears. I mean, how could they even still exist with some of the things they've been caught doing? The earthquake in Haiti will come up. But anyhow, Jason, anything else you want to add before we jump into this thing proper?
No, let's move on to weather weapons, and let's talk about why these things are going on.
Yeah, man, I'll just kick it straight to you. We're going to probably go long here. We're going to cover weather weapons, the Red Cross, and FEMA as the basis of most of what we address here. So go ahead, Jason.
So the first thing I'd like to read to you folks is a quote from a 1931 book called The Scientific Outlook by Lord Bertrand Russell, discussing manipulating the weather. It may be that God made the world. That is no reason why we should not make it over. So I would say that the viewpoint of these kinds of people is really, really obvious.
Yeah, and before we jump in, I'm gonna state outright, when I was in San Diego looking at the chemtrails, concerned with the drought, not in a place that has to worry about hurricanes, I needed to realign myself with the mindset now that I'm in the East. Weather manipulation's been going on forever. Probably precedes the Industrial Revolution. In my eyes, weather manipulation is akin to the most simple, basic transmutation used in alchemy, where you turn water into air. As we get into this, you're going to find out that a lot of what people are reporting and discovering is that water vapor put into the air and then manipulated in certain ways is all it takes. It doesn't even appear that it's that hard, but I'll throw it back over to you. Keep pushing, Jason.
So weather manipulation has been going on for a long time. In regards to what was known as pluviculture, or rainmaking, the first notable individual was a man named Charles Mallory Hatfield. In 1902, he had created a secret mixture of 23 chemicals in large, galvanized tanks that he claimed would attract rain. The title he gave himself was Moisture Accelerator. He had various measures of possible success, with a huge fiasco occurring over an agreement to fill the Moreno Dam Reservoir near San Diego. He was paid $10,000 for the job, but flooding occurred and caused $3.5 million in damages as a hypothetical result of what he had done. Court battles went on for years, but as it was only a verbal agreement and things couldn't be really scientifically proven at all, it was just decided over the course of several court hearings that it was an act of God.
As a guy from San Diego, I know the dam, I know the story. This is back in 1902, and it begins to illustrate the point. Here are people at the turn of the last century involved in manipulating weather. And I would ask, we just came off the tail of a supposed 10-year drought in California, which is claimed to be one of the worst on record. California's Central Valley produces, I don't know how much food for the United States and the world. It's sometimes referred as the breadbasket of the world. How come, to stop that drought, nobody simply went up and cloud seeded, which has been going on since the turn of the last century, as you can see by the report that Jason made of this man in 1902. It goes to show the tale. If I had to look back now and estimate what the chemtrailing was mostly about in San Diego that I filmed for thousands of hours, I would estimate that it is drying out the air. I think the chemtrails can be loaded to go either way, but I think that almost entirely our weather is manipulated now, and it comes down to manipulating moisture. Anyhow, back to you, Jason.
Next, we're going to do cloud seeding, which started in the 1940s, at least officially as we can find. Project Cirrus was the first attempt to modify a hurricane. This was a group effort by the U.S. Army Signal Corps, the Office of Naval Research, the U.S. Air Force, and the General Electric Company. The hypothesis was that by seeding the area around the eye wall with silver iodide, latent heat would be released, promoting the formation of a new eye wall. Since the new one would be larger than the old one, the winds would be less powerful due to a reduced pressure gradient. Any lowering of the wind speeds, of course, is beneficial since the damage potential increases with the square of the wind speed. Due to the initial efforts made with the project, a major snowstorm was created on December 20th, 1946 through cloud seeding. GE dropped out for legal reasons after that. Other hurricanes were messed with that led to damages on land and led to litigations, the biggest of which hit Savannah, Georgia, causing 1 death and $3.2 million in damages. That project was formally ceased after this. Now also bear in mind, $3.2 million in 1940s money is a heck of a lot more today.
Yeah, and we should preface a couple things. I mean, you're up to the 1940s here, so you're still pre-World War II. But one of the first things I started to do to be able to demonstrate that the storms we're seeing now have human hands behind them was to look up laws. You will find that the UN has weather manipulation laws, that most of the major countries in the world have weather manipulation laws. Even in the United States, many of the individual states have weather manipulation laws. But I will put this into the pot for people to think about as we go through this. Many of the laws that I read through, and I read through a crap load of them, talk about not being able to use weather as a weapon in wartime. And they further talk about beginning storms or bad weather within the confines of a country. So I would ask, if a hurricane is generated and started by manipulation off the coast of Africa in a time that is not wartime, I guess it is perfectly legal by most of the things I read. But anyhow, Jason, you brought us up to just pre-World War II, and you're already beginning to show the big corporations, the Air Force, of course, who famously published not too long after this a document called Owning the Weather by 2025, which I think you're going to get to. Anyhow, back over to you.
In 1949, Dr. Irvin P. Crick, an American meteorologist, inventor, and the founding professor of the Department of Meteorology at the California Institute of Technology from 1933 to 1949, came up with a way of performing ground-based cloud seeding. So they no longer needed to do dangerous maneuvers with airplanes getting near these hurricanes. Now they could do it from the ground.
Yeah, I've got to state again, all of this seems to be based in the ideas of alchemy, where the basic elements of our existence are broken down to water, air, wind, fire, earth. There's no getting away from these things. Modern science has kind of pushed the idea of alchemy into the arena of maybe like fortune telling. It's been made to look ridiculous when in fact it's not. Alchemy is basically the idea of having a type of science that stays wholly within the confines of nature. So when you look at someone here in 33 coming up with a ground-based seeding, I would ask again, how is it that there was a 10-year drought in California, the breadbasket of this country, and nothing was done to water the crops? And I think we'll get into this as we move along. Go ahead, man.
The Brits also got in on this. Between 1949 through 1952, the British Royal Air Force was doing cloud seeding experiments with Project Cumulus. Accusations were made that this caused the 1952 flooding of the Denon village of Lynmouth, resulting in 34 deaths and other major structural damage. Throughout the 1950s and into the 1960s, various cloud seeding projects took place. In 1958 in Palm Springs, California, jets were used to create artificial clouds to block out the sun, which were chemtrails. The Navy creates and destroys artificial clouds with soot or carbon black dust.
For anyone who's ever been out to Palm Springs, I've been out there so many times I can't even count them. It's basically high desert. And so to be able to manipulate weather in an environment like this really begins to tell you the finite control that they have. It was stated, when I was a roadie, we used to go out to Palm Springs to do shows there sometimes. And the local stagehands there, because we were all freelance, I knew a number of them, claimed that when they were young, the humidity in Palm Springs was always near zero, and that since they had put the golf courses in all over Palm Springs, now regularly the humidity would register up 4, 5, 6% or something like that. I forget the numbers exactly, but you can begin to see what we're talking about here. Anyone who's even seen images of Palm Springs understands that that is one of the driest, hottest damn places you can imagine, and here even just putting golf courses in is changing the local environment. So go ahead, Jason.
The 1950s into the 1980s, we have projects Skyfire and Skywater, which would attempt to use cloud seeding techniques to help with lightning fires in the west of the United States. Then this is those horrible fires that happen every year and are actually going on right now that just devastate over and over and over again, you know?
You know, the fires are a funny thing. The firestorms are real. I've been there in real firestorms, and it really does. It changes the weather. The fire becomes the weather of the place, and it's quite a scary thing. Fires will start all over the place because, you know, cinders and everything are being sucked up into the atmosphere and dropped many miles from where they started. But before I left San Diego the last time, we began to notice on the news that they were reporting 5 or 6 fires going on. We knew for a fact that 3 of them were controlled burns. Absolutely knew for a fact that 3 of them were controlled burns being passed off as firestorms in the national weather. It had gotten so bad that many of the local people where I live suspected that even the real fires were being lit on purpose. So that's kind of a side note, but go ahead, back over to weather, Jason.
From 1962 through 1983, we have another project called Storm Fury, which would be trying to weaken tropical storms.
So the dates we have on this are what? 1962 to 83, Project Storm Fury. Here they are working on learning how to weaken a tropical storm. That seems like something that might have come in handy as Harvey was approaching Houston. Is there anyone out there that disagrees? So technology from the 50s to the 80s, where they were working to weaken a storm, you've got to imagine that we are light years beyond where they were then in both capability, technology, science. All of it has to be light years ahead, and yet here we go again, watching major hurricanes come into a heavily populated area, and nothing is done whatsoever as far as we can tell to slow them down. And what we're going to try to demonstrate here is actually the opposite is true. These storms are being generated and fed. These are planned events. Anyhow, Jason.
Well, at this point, just with what we've gone through so far, the minimal assumption one can make that if a big storm is going to hit land and cause damage and possibly hurt or kill people, it's being allowed to happen. They're not doing anything to stop it. And that's not even talking about if anything was generated intentionally or not. Just that if a big old storm comes in, they don't do anything to prevent it, and it's obvious that they've been at least attempting to and have had some sort of success since really all the way back into the 40s.
Well, I think the argument could be made, even the cloud seeding idea where you were talking about how they were making a new wall. What this basically comes down to is moisture in the air. If you could force a big storm like that to drop a ton of moisture back into the ocean, you probably would dilute it. I know there are people out there that would make the argument that it would create the cycle where it's evaporating back up depending on the heat of the surface water. But the point is, we're talking about many, many, many decades ago, just past the middle of the last century. we're talking about here, where they were working on diffusing storms. So yeah, Jason, I think that's a correct assumption. We see nothing done like this at all to try to decrease the power of these storms. So let's get into showing, if we can, for the average mind, that these things are being frickin' manipulated and fed and maybe even created from the get-go.
What I do a lot of times when I'm reading these things is I make a comparison to what else was going on in the world, or we're talking about the United States here. So what was going on in the daily lives of the United States when they're doing all this crazy stuff, like trying to control the weather? You have people watching on their single little black and white television the Howdy Doody show and driving giant cars. You know, like, you think about the comparisons in what people were doing versus what's going on behind the scenes that they don't know about. You know, it just shows that there's this massive gap between inside the Matrix and outside of it, if you want to call it that. You know, it's like they've got stuff going on that people just wouldn't have even dreamed of in the 1950s.
You know, it always reminds me of the idea of the circuses of Rome or the games of Rome, where, you know, it's claimed that this or that leader of Rome claimed, give the people bread and games and they'll be content. We can do whatever the hell we want. Well, this is what entertainment is. I've said it before in past episodes. We really don't have culture in the United States of America where I live. What we have is some television shows and movies we watch. That's what we have. We sure as hell don't have culture. You want to find culture, go to a place like India where you're on your, 15th generation of some person is in a trade. That, in fact, is culture. What we have in the United States, I don't even know what to call it. It's basically entertainment-induced nonsense. That's what we have.
Next, we're going to talk about Project Westford, which ran from 1961 through 1963, and it attempted to create an artificial ionosphere by launching 480 million copper dipole antennas into orbit, the majority of which fell back into the ice by the North Pole, but some are still said to be up there. And I saw a picture of this, and just little bitty needles is what they looked like, short needles. Yeah, I don't know how successful they were because I didn't go into great detail about it, but I mean, that's messing with the whole place we live on with this kind of nonsense,
Well, look at the dates, man. 61 to 63. This precedes my existence in this lifetime. And they're doing stuff like this. So it really begins to draw a picture of how concerned they have been with manipulating the ionosphere, manipulating weather, figuring out how to weaken a storm, figuring out how to make a rainstorm, all these things. It's been going on since longer than I've been alive, and I've been alive for over half a century. It's painting a picture here. Go ahead, Jason.
In May of 1963, space weather modification is said to have begun with something called plasma seeding. They were making ion clouds out of barium and strontium, which are normally attributed to what is found in chemtrail particles. So it sounds like the notion of what to use and how to use it has been around for a very long time before the chemtrail phenomenon started in the 90s.
So there it is, man. Before I'm even existing in this lifetime, they are talking about inserting barium and strontium up into the atmosphere. If you talk to any person who has followed what's been going on with chemtrails, you will always hear 3 heavy metals bandied about as things that have been proven through lab testing, collection, other methods of showing what these planes are spraying. Those 3 things are barium, strontium, and some form of aluminum. Of course, the argument is always made that the amount of aluminum that's being put into our environment plays directly into things like Alzheimer's and other things. I don't know how to address that. I don't know how you would ever address that. But let's be clear here. You start putting heavy metals like barium, strontium, and forms of aluminum into the environment, I think we can probably all agree these are not healthy things to do to an environment. This is so far from a natural idea of alchemy, where if I want to do a procedure, I have to use the 4 elements that make up this world. I have to do it according to time of year, and I have to make things that will basically transmute from one element into the next. What's going on here is a corruption. To the point where when I was recently reading some of the oldest alchemical texts I've been able to get my hands on so far, Paracelsus, I think, is the name of the author. Just so people know, I believe that name means equal to or greater than someone named Celsus. So his work was based on someone even further back named Celsus, I believe. But the point here is that in the old alchemical text, it is put forward that the old Greek idea of Satan is basically science. It is basically where they broke away from alchemy, which was a naturally based system in a natural world, and they broke away and created science, which they viewed as the idea of Satan because it was a corruption. It was a corruption against the, for lack of better words, the light of God that made this perfect natural system. From our point of view, the natural world is a perfect system. Men do not make perfect systems. This is how the idea of the light or the creation of God comes into things. For some people, others will put a more religious idea behind it, which is fine. Point is, from our point of view, that's a perfect system. When science, which is exactly what Jason and I are addressing here, corruption was introduced into the system. Previously, when an alchemical procedure was done, nothing was ever lost from the system. One element transmuted into another, into another, into another. No noxious, gnarly, bad things were ever created. And then came along chemistry and science, the things that we're addressing here, where bad things are done all the time. The side effects are endless. Even a car engine, every time you start it, is spewing corruption out the tailpipe. The exact opposite of the ideas of alchemy. So I wanted to put that in here because from my point of view, the kind of Luciferian elite mindset of the people who must be behind this kind of thing are whole hog with science. And when you begin to view scientism and science in a new light, where it has no concern a lot of the time for a natural environment or this perfect system, which we would have called our natural environment, which creates the weather, which must have been a perfect system at some point. That's all now corrupted, and it's corrupted because of science. But let's keep pushing, Jason, see if we can demonstrate it.
Next, we're going to touch on Operation Popeye, a highly classified weather modification program that was run during the Vietnam conflict from 1967 until 1972. Cloud seeding was once again used in an attempt to extend the region's monsoon season over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This infamous route was used at the time to provide support in the form of manpower and material to the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. The stated reason that anyone in the public ever actually found out about this operation was due to a journalist named Jack Anderson who saw a secret memo in 1967 that was on Lyndon B. Johnson's desk. The memo was from the Joint Chiefs of Staff to President Johnson and read thus: Laos operations continue as at present, plus Popeye, to reduce the trafficability along the infiltration routes, and authorization requested to implement operational phase of weather modification process previously successful, tested, and evaluated in some areas.
This is interesting as hell to me, Jason, for the following reason. Almost everywhere I read, from UN laws to major country laws about weather modification, stated implicitly that it could not be used in wartime. What do we know about the Vietnamese not war? They never declared war. I wonder if that plays into it. I truly wonder if that plays into it, because it is described in history as a conflict because war was never declared. So I wonder if these weather operations were leveraging off the idea that this was not a war legally. You can see where I'm going here, but even at some of the large country laws, and certainly at the overarching UN and all that, almost everything is tied to the idea of using weather as a weapon during wartime. So what do you think, man?
Well, I intentionally, while writing my notes, did not write the words Vietnam War, and I've been very careful about that since we've been doing these shows, to make sure I try to state things as factual as possible, because Vietnam was not a war. There was never an official declaration of war. Neither was Korea. As a matter of fact, the United States, as far as officially on paper, has not been at war since World War II. Everything else has just been, what they call police actions or military actions or strikes or something like that. But there's been no official declaration of one country going to war with another country, as far as the United States is concerned. Yeah, World War II.
Well, we'd have to consider weather modification then, wouldn't we? You know, is that playing into this? Because they're so kind of persnickety with, you know, their corporate laws and the laws of the world and not disobeying these things. You've got to wonder if not declaring war is playing into their ability to modify the weather. I mean, in the case of Vietnam, let's consider something like Agent Orange. Of course, the encoded overtone here is that orange is the only numerological color that will break down to 33 in standard numerology procedures, and a lot of people make a lot of hay out of that, and I think for good reason. You can see things like The Fifth Element, the movie where a lot of people have orange hair and orange clothes on. There's a reason for these things, but my point here would be is if we look at Agent Orange, this is the absolute idea of science as a corruption. Whether or not it happened, we're told they dumped this defoliant all over the jungles of Vietnam. If you turn on your television today, the jungles of Vietnam would be telling you, oh, there's this endangered deer, only place it lives, this kind of thing, all these, you know, UNESCO heritage sites that need protecting. And yet we are told during the Vietnam conflict, not war, that they were doing things like dumping Agent Orange, which in a way is a bit like weather modification. It's using chemicals to modify the environment, if in fact it happened. Anyhow, back to you, man.
And that's exactly it. I think that they can get around a lot of these things because they're not doing any official declarations. So on paper, they could say we're not at war. Also, let's not forget the fact that most of these storms get generated out in the middle of the ocean somewhere where I'm assuming it is
international waters,
yeah. So it's not on anyone's borders or behind anyone's borders, I should say. So there you have it. You know, they can play games just with the fact of what is and isn't on paper.
I think you hit on something crucial here, man. I was not aware that a declaration of war had not been implemented for that long. And if that is in fact true, Jason, my guess is, you know, I'm getting ready to start stating openly that weather is no longer forecast. It's scheduled. That is my point of view. Having done the research, you know, I remembered back to all the chemtrail filming I did that was so localized to San Diego in a drought, a place where hurricanes never come. When I've blown it open and reevaluated some of the things I looked at before, but to what I know now, you've got to wonder, will we ever see war declared again? Because it could be that the totality of weather in this world is basically under the aegises of what's being done in one part of the world or another, and we can demonstrate outright even things as simple as a rocket launch, a big rocket launch from NASA. There's footage on YouTube, anyone can look it up, where there's a man standing there saying, watch, NASA's going to play God, this big rocket's going to go up. It does, and about 30 seconds later, a downpour occurs because of the rocket launch. It's interesting, Jason. We'll have to look into this idea, and we'll have to keep our eye to see if we ever see war declared again, because if we don't, in my estimation, I would have to begin to try to tie weather modification and the laws around weather modification to these ideas.
Right, and as I told you off the air, the lady who was doing the bus tour when I went to the Stennis NASA Center the other day,
yep,
blatantly said when they test the rocket engines, it can frequently rain afterwards for up to 10 minutes. And that's an unintentional consequence of just launching a rocket off, just to test the engine, make sure it's working the way it's supposed to. So there you go. It's just water vapor manipulating the area around it.
That's right.
Second of all, when we're talking about war, think about how often that term is used when it's not actually being used in its proper way.
Right.
How long have they been saying we have a war on terror? Well, that's great. I'm glad you have a war on terror. Terror is not a country you can declare war on. It is just a boogeyman state of mind that they're just saying. It's a war with no borders, with no targets, no locations. It's just a general statement saying we're going after it. Well, that's great. That's got nothing to do with any sort of legalities whatsoever.
Damn good point. Damn good point. And I would further point out, since you just went to Stennis, I had at least 5 people contact me between the time we're recording now and the last show we did on weather, claiming that Stennis, the what is it, a space center, I guess, Stennis Space Center there in Houston, their claim they were making, and I tried to confirm this, I just couldn't find anything that was bulletproof. They claimed that they were doing atmospheric testing, putting water vapor into the air as part of its preparation for their voyage to Mars. That is all nonsense. That will never happen, ever, in anyone's lifetime, as Harvey was making landfall. Did you hear any of this, or did you see anything more concrete than I was able to dig up?
Well, I did ask some questions to the bus tour driver after we got done driving around, because everything's still classified. Like, there was security gates set up and all that, but you basically do a little tour if you want to go on it around everything. And I saw 3 giant platforms where they do put the giant rocket engines to test, and that's what she brought up, the point on the weather. But I asked, out of sheer curiosity, there's another NASA facility in New Orleans called Michoud. And that's where they're supposed to be designing, I believe, the SLS systems, as well as the command module for the Orion mission, which is to be used for deep space, as well as they're saying they're sending it to Mars. So I was like, hey, can you go to that one? I would like to see a tour of that one. And she said, no, that's the only people who get in there are VIPs and things like that. Like, you can't just do a normal tour. So that kind of killed my hopes on that one. I really wanted to get in and see what's going on in there.
So they only allow very indoctrinated people?
I suppose. Now, I did do a look on Facebook just for the heck of it, and I did find just normal people in the New Orleans area who work there, as I would expect. So I don't know if I could strike up a friendship with someone just to talk about it and see if there's anything fishy going on, but, you know, that's probably not very likely. But I'm trying to do an old school investigative journalist work, if possible, just to see if I can get any information that's not something on the internet, you know?
You're totally the man. You're totally the man. You went to Stennis right before we did this weather mod episode, so, I mean, hats off to you. Anyhow, you ready to head towards 1974?
Yeah, some secret meetings, governmental meetings or congressional hearings, I'm not sure exactly what they're considering them, were held in 1974 regarding weather modification. And of course, lie after lie after lie were told in these meetings saying that they weren't doing it. Well, the whole Operation Popeye thing alone shows that they were doing it. And there were 3 of these meetings held. The first 2 are now public, and you can look them up, just as I did. But the third is still classified, so goodness only knows what was going on there. But that was probably where everything was admitted, and they don't want that available to the public.
Well, they don't want you to get your hands on the texts that start to say near September 11 or on September 11. You know, the modern eye would not be fooled by these things. September, let me count the ways, man. You know, I was saying before Harvey even made landfall that we needed to keep our eyes on what was going on as we came into September 11. We needed to keep our eyes on, you know, the obvious things that were being done, the not so obvious things were being done. You know, one of the people we had on our last episode as an eyewitness was telling me they were moving military assets into Houston, and then he later contacted me and said he believed the laws had been changed to allow police to use military assets. Now, I mean, it's loophole after loophole. If you remember back to Waco, Texas, another staged historical event in the history of America, the whole thing came up was you're not allowed to use military assets within the border of the United States. It's the whole idea of Caesar crossing the Rubicon. While I don't accept ancient history or even the history of Rome we've been handed, there's an idea in the history of Rome we've been handed that they never learned their lesson. Like at least 3 times their own standing armies tipped over Rome and took it over. That's the idea behind crossing the Rubicon. So fast forward to Waco, or the staged event we call Waco in the United States, and all these military assets were coming in and it became a thing. Well, here we go a little further down the road to Harvey, and we're having eyewitness accounts of Abrams tanks being moved into place, and I haven't been able to confirm this yet, but usually this individual is pretty spot on, so I'll take it at face value for now, until I can look with my own eyes, that police, the laws are being shifted somehow so that police can use these military assets. The whole point of this is you can see how important the legality of things is, where I guess the idea would be no one can ever haul them into court because they haven't broken the letter of the law or something like that. I mean, are you aware of any of this?
Well, I just certainly heard about military going into these areas, and obviously everyone knows that they put the reserves on standby during times of emergencies. So yeah, right. we know the military gets involved, and just from the eyewitnesses that we heard about, they had them. And we know, as far as Houston is concerned, but we know that during Katrina there were tons of military, and I've always thought they were using it as a test bed to see how would the military respond on American soil going against American citizens.
You've got to wonder, because I should have looked it up before we got into this episode to see what the rules of engagement are for using actual military within the borders. Of course, when there's a declared emergency, an act declared for emergency, the National Guard and other things have always been able to be brought to bear. As a matter of fact, when I was in the Marine Corps, there were certain situations, fires and the earthquake in San Francisco, I think, where Marines were used to go out and help clean up and do rescues and other things. But clearly these were emergencies. So that's something for us to look at, Jason, because I think clearly we're seeing the fudging of the lines of how the military can be implemented without breaking the letter of the law here. And if I had to guess, this is exactly part of what's going on in Houston.
What's that whole posse comitatus thing where they're not supposed to be using military on the streets of the United States at all? But, of course, well, it's an emergency. We can do whatever we want is pretty much what it comes down to.
Right. It's fear porn. Of course, if you can, it's no different than 9/11. If you can scare the bejesus out of enough people, you can do nearly anything, to include them to bend over and take a colonoscopy just to get on a damn airplane, which is where we're at now, which was built on the back of fear, which was based on a made-up event. So you can see what's going on here, but you and I got a lot of work to do. We can demonstrate without argument that weather modification has been going on since forever, basically. Can we demonstrate, Jason, in the course of what we're doing, that it is more than likely, almost a certitude, that these storms were modified, pumped up, or flat out created in some way?
As far as I can tell from what we've been looking into, they can be created. That doesn't necessarily mean that storms don't form on their own, but they can be created if desired. And there's no doubt that they can be modified in some way, shape, or form, and with all likelihood they could probably be just obliterated while they're still at sea. But, as I stated earlier, it seems like they just don't.
Right, and I think that is a key point. It's the same thing as the drought in California I keep going back to. We've been able to make it rain since, the early 1900s at least. Why didn't anyone come and help those poor farmers who are growing all the food for the entire country and parts of the world in the Central Valley of California? By deduction, that tells us certain things about the drought, and I think the point you just made tells us certain things about the weather. If you, in fact, had the technology to reduce the power and fury of a storm, which I would be willing to bet my last dollar they do, why wasn't it brought to bear here? And if it wasn't brought to bear, what does that tell you about the storm itself? And that's where I'm at, man. Just to keep going a little further, there are people like Patrick Roddy, who we've had on the show, who's friends with Matt Landman, who has been going over the imagery from these storms and trying to demonstrate that he can actually see in the imagery we're being given, the video feeds, that the storms are being pumped up with water vapor, NextRad, these kinds of things. Anyhow.
Well, that's what we saw with the Harvey thing, too, that it looks like it was refueled 3 times with this technology, or one variation of the technology, because I think there's a couple different kinds.
Right. One thing that always gets me is here on the East Coast, they never get the weather right. They can see the weather coming all the way from the west in a lot of cases, and they'll tell you it's going to rain or something, and it doesn't happen. They get it wrong all the time. If you go back and look at what we were being told before Harvey made landfall, it was freaking spot on, man. It's like someone had a crystal ball. It's going to go in, it's going to stall out, it's going to dump all this rain. I mean, they basically told you verbatim what was about to happen, along with all the fear porn that accompanied it. But anyhow, let's get back on the road here.
So 2 laws exist on the books as of the 70s regarding weather modification. And the first is the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972. And the second is the National Weather Modification Policy Act of 1976.
Went on for a hell of a long time, and things like this are coming to be way back in the 70s. In the 70s, we didn't even have computers, much less the level of science that can be brought to bear now. But anyhow, we're coming close to the top of the hour here, Jason, and I got an intro to tack on. What's your feeling? Should we go long on the first hour? Should we cut as we normally would and have a very long second half? What do you want to do here?
Well, there's a good bit to get through on weather modification yet, so what I'd like to tie up for hour 1 is this last point, and it's something called ENMOD, the Environmental Modification Convention, formerly called the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or Any Other Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques. And it's an international treaty prohibiting the military or other hostile use of environmental modification techniques having widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects. It opened for signature on May 18th, 1977, and entered into force on October 5th, 1978. It bans weather warfare of all kinds. A later treaty called the Convention on Biological Diversity would also bring this notion into play. The three main goals are the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from genetic resources. It went into force on December 29th, 1993. This all revolves around what is known as sustainable development. So, to sum all this up, at this point, it's obvious that the technology to manipulate the weather exists, and no doubt countries all over the world are certainly doing so in some way. And good sources of water, which has become known as blue gold, has become a major commodity, and that they're going to use these techniques to do what it is they need to do to get what they want. I think that's a good way to kind of sum up everything we've seen so far, and we're only into the 70s, really. And look what they've already been able to achieve. It's 2017, folks.
It's crazy, man. You just said this thing went into force on December 29. There's 9/11 encoded again. But I would ask a simple question here, Jason, on the tail of these NMOD comments, which is a big damn deal. People go look this stuff up. Look at it. You have all these laws that I saw from the UN, all the major countries, talking about weather warfare being illegal. The manipulation and creation of severe weather to be used as a weapon. I would ask this simple question. Why in the hell do these laws not simply state you can't do these things to harm people, animals, or environments? Right? Why wouldn't you do that? You know damn well when lawyers sit down at a table to write laws of this nature that it is so finitely detailed and referencing other documents and all these other things that on the face of it, to point out that it's against the law to use it for military is wholly telling to me, because it leaves open the use of these things in a non-wartime environment. I mean, am I wrong? What do you think about that? Why don't they just say you can't modify the weather to harm people?
Well, they kind of do, but from what I saw in the research, the NMOD situation just has no teeth at all. It just doesn't get enforced. So they're saying you can't do it, but they're not doing anything about it, because it all comes down to the fact, well, go ahead and prove it. I mean, if all these programs are top secret, you got to have somebody kind of like the Popeye thing where it got noticed accidentally to even bring it to light in the first place. So I strongly suspect that they're so good at keeping these things clamped down at this point, someone's got to be around to be able to squawk about it to who knows what it is in the first place,
I would agree with you, but the only problem I can see is that most of this stuff seems to be so ironclad, bulletproof, and careful. To simply ignore laws that you're going to violate leaves the door open for a possible route of attack from some outsider. I mean, that's just my point of view. But anyhow, we are to the top of the hour, Jason. We have so much to get through. Do you want to do a quick rundown to let people know just the staggering amount of information we're going to cover in the second hour or two?
Yeah, we're going to go through the information quickly on a man named Jim Lee, who has a website called climateviewer.com that I thought was very interesting. We're going to go over what HARP is, and we're going to discuss chemtrails, of course, and NEXRAD like we got into last week as far as the weather weapons. Next, after that, we're going to get into the Red Cross and everything that seems to have gone on with some major chicanery with them, and also dig into FEMA a bit, because they're always involved with any kind of disaster. So, yeah, huge action-packed second hour, folks.
So before we cut off, I mean, let's just address the Red Cross for a second to let people, because there's so much here, and I want so much of it more to be in the first hour. That's why I opened with these fraudulent damn celebrities, these entertainers, these Hollywood people fleecing America for money. In my view, that's what's going on anyhow. Let's talk about the Red Cross for a minute. As we were getting ready to ramp this episode, I looked at so many people saying the Red Cross was basically owned by the Rothschild family. Let's do a spoiler here. Where are you at, man? Is there any legitimacy to the Red Cross? Should people be giving money to the Red Cross?
Okay, this is what I found on the Red Cross to give it very simple, and we'll break all this down in detail in the second hour. The International Red Cross has direct Rothschild ties. The American Red Cross has direct Rockefeller ties. And while I have no doubt, there are tons of people, especially volunteers, who want to just do things to help people during times of crisis.
Right.
What it all comes down to is the money, or at least a very large amount of the money that's donated, does not go where you think it goes, and a lot of it is just used for some sort of profit-making scheme. Harsh comment, but, it is what it is.
Hey, it is what it is. It damn well is what it is. And anyone who wants to look up what happened in Haiti, where it's claimed, $500 million or something they collected, they built 5 or 6 concrete foundation houses on the tail of all that. They got caught. They got caught on the tail of Katrina. There was a CEO fired. Last time I heard the CEO was fired, and it wasn't that long ago, less than 10 years, I think. I'm not sure. Maybe a little more than 10 years. They were making close to $200,000 a year, I think, if I remember correctly. I saw the listed CEOs thing in the research for this episode at $500 million, $500,000. But here, I'll make the flat-out statement. The Red Cross, I don't think you could come up with a charity with a worse record that you can look up. Jason and I are going to try to draw the lines to Rothschild, the Rockefellers, and other places to show the American people. Right after Harvey started up, on every channel of Sirius satellite radio, the Red Cross began to shill for people to give money. All across television, they began to shill for people to give the Red Cross money. They teamed up with Walmart in some of these television advertisements to say Walmart will match every dollar you give to the Red Cross. Walmart, that creepy ass place, will give $2. And then the fine print said, but Walmart might not give any money at all. It might just give goods or services. Later there was an ad said, thanks, we collected 25 million. Who knows if that number's even accurate? And in the fine print it says, guess what? Walmart gave goods and services. What we're telling you here is these charities are not what you think they are. We got to wrap up the first hour here. Anything you want to add, Jason?
Folks, to round this all off, the notion that weather manipulation is just a crazy conspiracy theory, that statement is just poppycock. It's absolutely a real thing. It's been going on for decades. And
damn right.
Yeah, I don't really need to go any further. I mean, and let me point out the fact that I skipped a lot of stuff just so I could fit it into this 2-hour program. There's so much more I could have done, and I was just like, no, I'm going to just pick out some of the more salient points. But when I was looking at it, there's more. There's plenty more. So go look for yourselves.
Yeah, you know what? Stevie Wonder. Anyone who doesn't understand weather manipulation is real is either blind or not that intelligent. Anyhow, that brings us to the top of the first hour of episode 73, Crrow777 Radio. The second, maybe even third hour, because this is definitely going to go long, we're going to rip apart the Red Cross. We're going to further rip apart weather because we're beginning to understand in a more meaningful way what is actually going on in our world. And of course, Jason and I have best wishes for all the people of Houston. We know damn well some bad things happen there. We've talked to people on the ground. As far as Florida, I've heard from 5 people who say where they were was nowhere near as bad as the fear porn being pushed, but we need to hear from more people. So there it is, man. I hope you join us for the second hour over at Crrow777radio.com. Cheers. right, man. Welcome to Crrow777 Radio Podcast. This is episode 36, and as I alluded to in episode 35, I was able to get the YouTube channel Changing Reason. I took an interest in Changing Reason because I realized that I was watching a person nearly in real time come to the realizations about the false media and false news cycles that run our world. Anyhow, let's get him in here. Welcome.
Hey there, Crow.
It's
good to be here.
Yeah, so good to have you. We were talking earlier, and I realized as we were getting to know each other that we should be recording. So let's just kind of go over a couple of the things that we already touched on. Can you tell everybody how long it's been since you've kind of become aware of what news is around the world, and what it was that got you to start looking?
Okay. I'm actually going to go back a little bit further than our earlier conversation, and this is something that I do discuss in detail in an earlier video of mine. It was probably around 2006, 2007. The loose change video was brought to my attention, and that was what kind of opened my eyes to 9/11. Up to then, I was just like everybody else, terrorist attack, blah blah blah. It never felt quite right to me, but I never put my finger on what was wrong. So anyway, I watched that video. I was convinced that something was amiss with 9/11. The whole concept of an inside job. I bought that. That made sense. But it wasn't anything that kind of affected my day-to-day life. It was a YouTube video. You know what I mean? And it was just kind of a standalone strange thing. And I already, I didn't like George W. Bush, so I kind of just compartmentalized, the whole 9/11 thing.
But that was really your first precursor to maybe get you thinking that maybe the news wasn't telling you the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. At the time, I didn't put two and two together and think, oh, well, maybe the media was complicit or any of that. I think I had a very kind of superficial understanding of the event. It wasn't exactly as we were told it was, but I didn't put a huge amount of extra research into it. So years went by, and then Popular Mechanics came out with their debunking article, and I had read that, and I kind of let myself convince myself that okay, maybe the 9/11 thing isn't, maybe there isn't this crazy conspiracy. Maybe I'm just being silly. And
that is an interesting point. So you're saying, I think you said sometime around 2006, you see a YouTube video that gets you questioning things, but then a mainstream magazine kind of dials that back and gets you to the point where you kind of dismiss it again.
Absolutely, because it was very uncomfortable. The whole believing that 9/11 wasn't what I was told was uncomfortable. So I think I was very open to some sort of authority telling me it's okay, it's not what you think. But I ended up watching between 2010, I think that's when that article came out, and since then I've watched other videos, and there's just there's no disputing what happened on 9/11 now. But even at that point, 9/11 was still kind of an isolated thing. I wasn't reading it as just one part of a huge web of deception. So this brings us up to what we were discussing earlier, and I was watching some of your videos. I had come across your lunar wave videos, which I found fascinating. And then one of your videos had ended with a chant about Sandy Hook. Nobody died, nobody got hurt. And I had no idea what that was about. The notion of a hoaxed event was foreign to me at the time. So I was interested. I was open-minded enough to go, I got to know, what do you mean nobody died at Sandy Hook? So I did a brief search on YouTube, and of course, as any of your listeners would know, I found just an avalanche of videos on the topic. Of course, at the top of the list was "We Need to Talk About Sandy Hook," which I watched in its entirety probably a couple times, and then several other videos after that. And there's no disputing, after watching that stuff, that it was an entirely staged, faked, hoaxed event.
So this was about a year ago then, when you finally came across the video that I made, and just to be fair, that the nobody died, nobody got hurt was lifted from Dave J. But so it was roughly a year ago, and it was another YouTube video that got you to the point where you finally realized all the nonsense.
Well, yeah, it was, then, I was convinced now that Sandy Hook was, a completely faked event. But then, that led me to, Boston bombing videos. It led me to Aurora theater shooting videos. And then, by that point, my world's been turned upside down, and what the bloody hell is going on. And then, I'll make sure I'm thinking clearly. It would have been the San Bernardino event, which was the first one that occurred after I had kind of begun to see the news with different eyes. I actually even started a video on it. There was another channel, Lift the Veil, who at the time was hitting the San Bernardino event pretty hard and putting out some pretty good stuff. And, to the point where, I wasn't going to bother, putting out a San Bernardino video because he had already hit all the big topics. And then, I think the next big one was the Brussels airport attack.
Oh, yeah.
And that was, that topic was the first topic I tackled in a real video. I did a couple, I put out some, scanner feeds and stuff, but that attacking the Brussels event was my first real entry into the YouTube scene.
Yeah, but that's kind of a big deal because look at the timeline you've drawn. So roughly a year ago, you see a video that I made lifting a chant that Dave J channel made. So that changes your mind. Then you begin to realize that one event is fake. Then you realize that a couple more events are fake within the United States, but then you jump international. So I mean, at that point, how are you viewing global, that's not even the right word, world media? How are you viewing it at this point? Are you still thinking to yourself, I have to take apart every single event? Or what's your mindset now that you've gone international and you're jumping in with your first video to take apart a faked event that happened in a different country?
Well, by that point, I was already convinced now that every major, at least terrorist attack or mass shooting was likely faked. I mean, the Brussels event, I think, was really what pushed me over the edge. And then, the Paris attacks were before that too, right?
I don't remember the timeline, but I can tell you this. Paris was one of the most poorly executed false flags. I mean, maybe not at the level Sandy Hook was, but anyhow, don't let me interrupt you.
Well, no, I mean, it was... Then it was clear to me, and I did research on several events. I don't do a video on everything that I research, and once you kind of get that paradigm shift, then the faked events are, I mean, it's clear as day. You don't even really have to do research, because you start seeing the same sorts of patterns, the same sorts of interviews, the same sorts of crappy video or crappy pictures, or the same sort of contrived stories or impossible coincidences, and it's just right there. It's like when you finally see the dolphin in that weird poster that you see at the mall.
Right.
You can't not see it. I mean, the fakery is just there.
So let me ask you, it's been a year, you've jumped in, I've recently seen you take apart false news. I think a bus crash was the last one I saw you do. I was impressed with your Macy's work because you did draw the line to cybernetics and Macy's involvement in that, showing what the upper crust and the rich people in this country are involved with. But are you at a point now, how do I say this? I always tell people that there's a point after you've lived your life for about a year, no longer consuming false media, no longer buying into the system, where your adult mind starts to work again. If you were to say turn on the news any given day of the week and hear maybe one or two sentences, do you think you could derive whether the ring of truth is in that newscast or not?
I feel like, intuitively, yes. I mean, the recent bus one, I mean, that set off my spidey sense
right
immediately. Logic dictates at this point that any mass shooting or any, quote unquote terrorist attack is likely faked, and here's why. If we all assume that the ones that we've identified as fake are truly fake, then they're all fake, because if these actually happened with any sort of frequency, you wouldn't need to fake them.
There it is, man. Logic rears its head. It's you just said a thing that there are so many people, probably even people that will listen to this, they just can't quite wrap their mind around what you just said. But what you just said is so critically important, because when a person reaches the deductive reasoning level that you just put out on the table, you're no longer fooled.
And I remember, I had put out, it was the Pulse nightclub, and this was the one, big mistake I made. I put out a video, and it was all about where the breach holes were located, and I screwed that part up and had to do a retraction. But I remember, some of the comments I was getting, and it was from other truthers having, I think maybe you're suffering from, confirmation bias, and, you just expect that it's fake. And that was where I kind of realized, well, of course I would expect that it's fake. I mean, and like I just said, if you have an agenda that's furthered by this sort of event, and this sort of event happens with some sort of regularity, why would you run the risk of faking one? Why wouldn't you just be patient, wait for the next inevitable real one to happen?
That's right.
But of course, none of this is real. We're meant to believe that human beings really do this to each other, and I don't believe they do.
There you go, man. You just said maybe one of the most important things a human being in this age can hear. Human beings do not treat each other like this. If they were left to their own devices, for the most part, violence on any level like this would be such a rarity as to have little or no impact on how a world lives. I will state verbatim that not only what you just said is true, but I have been shouting from the rooftops for so long now that this world is a very safe, very peaceful place that has been hidden by false violence.
Well, yeah, the idea that, not only do these things, that human beings are doing these things to each other, but it's happening daily.
Right.
It's preposterous.
It is. No, it's beyond the pale, and it's kind of a trippy thing to look back on your own life when you get to this point and try to imagine how was it that all those years, whatever point in anyone's life that might be, how was it that we couldn't see it back then? Do you have any ideas about that? What changed? I mean, for you, I guess you kind of found a trail of other people talking about it that led you to do your own research. But do you think something's actually changed? I mean, to put a random time up, why weren't there all kinds of us all over this nonsense like the Manson BS in the 70s?
I can't pretend to have a good answer for that. It may very well be that just, with the internet, that more people can, find like-minded individuals who, are thinking the same things. If the internet existed during the Manson murders, I mean, you would have people on YouTube, questioning it, going, "Hey, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense." So, in many respects, the answer to the question just may be, it's easier for
communication.
Yeah, the communication among, quote unquote conspiracy theorists is much easier now. So we can talk about these things. I mean, certainly I have to believe that people at the time, there had to have been a certain segment of the population, watching these events in real time going, something just doesn't add up. But who are they going to talk to?
Right. Now, that's an interesting thing. And I got to ask you, what are your feelings on something like, once you get to the place where you have recently arrived, then other questions are going to come, like the major events in history. So what are your feelings about something like the moon landing?
I'll go on record as saying I believe that is absolutely a faked event, 100% hogwash.
Did that change for you in light of what you came to know about world media and false violence and hoaxed news? Or had you had that, was that your view prior to you discovering, Sandy Hook or 9/11?
I think it's fair to say I was convinced that it was faked after kind of my awakening, after realizing that Sandy Hook was fake. I had always, I had seen, discussions about the moon landing, but I never kind of, I never really fully bought into it. I revisited that topic, after my awakening, so to speak, and and it clearly, there's so much material on the faked moon landings. I don't want to take a whole bunch of time, but just the fact that they never turn around 360 degrees. That by itself, in all of the footage, they never break the fourth wall.
Right.
I know if I were one of those guys and I was really on the frickin' moon, I'd be doing twirls.
Of course. And not only that, you'd be getting the best view of like other planets or whatever, you could see that anyone's ever had.
Yeah, it's all, but you have to be ready to see it, and to go back to your earlier question, why did we go so long without seeing these things, or how does an individual person go so long or continue to not see these things? It's a cliche, but we see what we expect to see. Just a year ago I thought Sandy Hook was real. If you're not exposed to that concept, it really doesn't cross your mind.
It's a funny thing. There's a line in the movie The Truman Show where Christoph, the guy living in the fake moon, says a very true thing. He says people accept the reality they're presented with. When people keep saying, you can't do this in front of Truman or that, he'll catch on. And he basically says, no, he won't. He'll believe whatever I tell him to believe. Which is a bit ironic because it was my chanting video. So I'm singing a chant that Dave J came up with, and I had talked with him, and I thought it was the best description I had ever heard, in kind of a one-liner to describe what was going on. I remember talking to him, telling him, you invented this, you got to put this on mugs and shirts and all this stuff. But the ironic thing here is all the clips that I've made, I intentionally sat down that day and I was going to use one of the methods I know is used against us, where you use just repetitiveness, where you keep saying the same thing over and over and over and over. And so, now that I've finally met you, if you're the only person that I ever hear of that watched one of my clips and got to where you were, then it was worth it, beyond what I can describe. But to get back to the idea, I'm asking you what you thought of the moon. The reason I did that is because I want to see, after a year, and now you're even challenging and breaking apart the false things that you see, and can even detect them without the assistance of another person or human being. Do you feel like there's a level where you won't go, like, what if I said to you, do you believe that World War II is real in the way it was presented to us? Ratchet it up another level. Where would you be with that?
At this point, nothing surprises me. So, I would be open, given compelling evidence, to just about anything, going back as far back as you want to go. honestly, I can't say that I've done the research on really anything other than current events. But no, I mean, there's no reason for me to believe that this is a recent thing.
Right.
I mean, we've probably been being lied to as far back, at least as, modern technology, as far back as radio and television. But hell, even before that, it was probably even easier to lie to people. You write it down, and a couple people who read the newspaper, you believe anything you're told. I mean, who knows how far this deception goes back.
Right. Well, what it really seems to be is that the same people who always held power, the royal houses, places like the Vatican, which of course are related to royal houses, they always held the power, they always made the rules, they did all these things. There's never been a time when the world wasn't governed in the way that we're seeing. It's just that we're seeing it in the light of modern technology. But as you begin to go back through history, you will discover, I recently took apart, I don't accept any war. It's exactly what you said. I was a Marine, and I was a Marine during the first Gulf War, and I remember consciously, as we were being shipped off, thinking to myself, will I aim my M16 at another human being and blow them away just because someone told me to? And I had decided that there's no way in hell. I'm not going to put that kind of baggage on my existence. I will not take another human life unless maybe I'm going to die or something. But before I had even left where I was in Japan, I had come to this realization, and later in life that got me thinking about all wars. So I went and took apart, more as a demonstration for others than myself, I took apart Pearl Harbor through a film called December 7th, which purported to be a documentary with real combat, and then a similar documentary on Midway to demonstrate that it was all nonsense. So I think what I'm hearing from you is that you're such a logical individual that you made the logical leaps that kind of prove you're in your adult higher mind, because while you may not be sure about many given things, you're not going to be surprised anymore.
No. And again, it's just a matter of seeing enough evidence. And most of the time, as I'm discovering, is that you really don't need to. Well, let me backtrack for a second. In most of my videos, I put a lot of information. I pack a lot of information into my videos. I think for anybody who is thinking clearly, I could make the videos 5 minutes long and they'd be like, okay, this is fake as shit, dude. I mean, it's
right.
Because how many bizarre coincidences do you need within an event? How many, how many nonsensical, circumstances? I mean, I put in, probably 15 or 20, anomalies, for lack of a better word, into my discussion. But I mean, do you really need that? I mean, would you need that many if? In your day-to-day life, I mean, you pretty much detect when somebody's lying to you pretty quick with maybe one piece of evidence.
That's right.
Yet when it comes to things we see on the news, our threshold is so much larger. Ridiculously large. Here's 10 things that don't make sense. Oh, well,
Well, right. It's kind of like the allegory, of being a child still. You need your daddy, and that patina that the news exudes, where they're the authority, and all us kids just need to listen. I mean, that's really what you're pointing at.
Yeah, I mean, if you suspected that your wife and your brother were having an affair, and found out that neither of them would answer their phone one afternoon, and you found out they were both, coincidentally on a business trip in the same city, you'd probably guess they were fucking. I mean, how many more pieces of evidence would you look for?
No, it's a good point. I mean, even if you just took this statistically, if you look at a news event and you find 3 things that just don't quite work, but you realize that there's 20 things. I mean, who can still, it's almost like most people have already made up their mind beforehand that can watch some of these videos. I mean, let's take your recent video that you did on the nonsense bus crash. One thing that just I loved about that video is actually why I reached out to you after I saw that video. I saw the Macy's work you did. I mentioned you in an episode as someone, and at that time I didn't even realize that it was one of my videos that got you doing your own research. But the Macy's videos, loved it. Loved to see what you were doing, and you were kicking down the walls around you. But that bus one, there's a certain part in the video where you actually did the research to show what a bus looks like being crushed in a tow yard, and then demonstrating its identical damage to the bus that's being portrayed in this fake bus crash. And what was so ironic about it is the research you did was almost like the truth wanted to be known. You know, what are the odds that you could get footage that is so compellingly identical?
Yeah, I did a little dance when I found that video. I couldn't believe it.
Hey, describe to people what we're talking about. And by the way, this is the last video up on Changing Reason YouTube channel. But tell them about the bus accident and then the footage you found.
Well, for those of you who don't know, on November 21st, supposedly a school bus in Chattanooga ran into a tree. Flipped over, ran into a tree. Boy, there's so much to that. Specifically the damage, the things on its side, it's against a tree. There's no dirt, there's nothing on this bus. I mean, it's perfectly pristine except for the structural damage. And it didn't look like it had hit a tree at a high speed.
Right, but you actually present the supposed bus that was supposed to have been in this accident that I guess killed kids or whatever they're claiming.
Yeah.
You had a front shot and a side shot after it was pulled out on the tow truck, and you noted at the time that the one good side shot they had hidden part of the bus with a tarp.
Oh yeah, the after they removed the bus the next day, they take the bus, they put it back on its wheels, they put it on a flatbed, they drive it off. There's all these photos and video of it. They've got a giant blue tarp covering the bulk of the damage, which that by itself is absolutely bizarre. Why on earth would you do that?
Right.
But then the overall shape, I've got a photo. It's a nice, perfect profile of the damaged bus, and it did not look to me like it hit a tree. It looked crushed. So I went onto YouTube and just did a search for, bus demolition or something like that, and lo and behold, came across this video of a bus being demolished in a scrapyard, and the damage is identical. As you pointed out.
It's freaking identical, man. So what happens is he gets pictures of the supposed false flag bus, but then he notices there's a tarp. And being a logically minded individual, he says, what the hell's that tarp doing there? What are they hiding? Why wouldn't you just tow a bus away? So he goes, finds this other footage. But what you see in the false flag bus is that the frame is bent and the front of the bus is crushed in a way that it should not be. It's crushed way too high. When he goes to the demolition yard and finds the other bus, the frame is identically bent in the same way when a machine presses it to crush it. And not only that, the damage on the front end of the demolition bus is identical to the false flag bus. And I was sitting here laughing my ass off by the time I got there, because in my mind it was almost like the truth was trapped in that bus screaming for someone to let it out,
Yeah, that somebody at some point randomly shot a almost identical bus being scrapped is, I guess, an amazing coincidence. It's stunning how closely you were able to show how that bus was likely actually damaged. But one thing I do encourage people who haven't already seen it to watch it. It's a long video. It's about 50 minutes. But the crash itself and the condition of the bus is really only a portion of what's wrong. I mean, just the whole idea of, there's this crazy bus driver and he's been picking on the kids and driving recklessly since the beginning of the school season, and parents are complaining, the principal of the school is complaining, all these people are complaining, and nobody did anything. I mean, the catastrophic, incompetence that is required in order for this to even be remotely true, by multiple bodies. I mean, it's just, it's impossible to believe. It's again, I use the word a lot, but it's preposterous. If this were a script in a movie, you'd think this is a ridiculous plot.
Right. Well, a lot of it seems to be in stories like this where subconsciously all the people that are eating up this nonsense are being disillusioned by authority. So, you expect, a school district or other people to conduct themselves in a certain way. But these stories, not only are they false, not only are they pushing the fear porn, not only are they doing all the things they're doing, but they're painting a picture that there's no portion of American society left that is competent in a way.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, we're just all, every organization on the planet is just completely retarded. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, it's a true thing. And how many kids were supposedly killed in this?
Well, ultimately it ended up, according to reports, being 6. I've got a breaking news app on my phone, so I was immediately notified as soon as this hit, the national airwaves, so to speak. And in the first, hour or two after the event was, after the story broke, it was 12 students dead.
They can't count. They can't count corpses.
It was 12 dead, and then it became 6 dead later that evening. Then by the next morning, it was 5 dead, and then 24 hours later or so, a 6th student died. Now, what's interesting here, because the naysayers say, well, people sloppy reporting, blah blah blah. But for one thing, these numbers came from somewhere. But more importantly, in the case of the 6 dead, after the 12 dead, the 6 dead was, quote, confirmed by the Chattanooga District Attorney's Office. How would they confirm 6 dead if actually only 5 were dead, and then the 5 became 6? So, is the DA's office, psychic? And where on earth would 12 come from?
Right. Well, that almost seems to me in a way, I don't know if you agree with this, and I meant to ask some other researchers this. We've been seeing this a lot lately, where the initial counts of how many people are dead or injured, it changes over the next couple days, and it almost seems to me what they're doing is trying to get people who take apart the numbers in these false events to put out videos that they can later, that will be wrong because they're going to change the numbers later. But I mean, do you have any opinion as to why the numbers would be changed in this way so publicly?
I don't know for sure. In this video, I chalk it up to just, the event didn't really happen. I mean, that's the first thing we need to understand. Is that, it didn't really happen. There weren't any kids on the bus. There wasn't a sadistic bus driver. I mean, it's all fiction. So you've got, a script of some kind, a literal script of some kind that has various numbers and a timeline and all that. And
right.
The 6 dead confirmed, so to speak, or supposedly by the district attorney's office. Maybe somebody read ahead. Oh, they missed. Oh, it's supposed to be 5 dead first, and they read 6 ahead of time, and then it had to be corrected. The 12 dead. A few days after the event, we're told that there's 12 in the hospital. 6 in stable condition, 6 in critical condition. So there we have the number 12. Is it a coincidence that early reports had 12 dead, and then they're reporting later 12 in the hospital? I mean, is it just a matter of people making mistakes, misreading the script, releasing information at the wrong time?
Well, this is what you just described is a methodology put forward by the Tavistock Institute on how to socially engineer, where you put out an event that people can never quite get their sharp picture of, and then you introduce conflicting information, and then you introduce erroneous information, then so you keep doing this until people just say, I don't give a crap anymore, and they accept it as true. So I mean, that pattern does follow the kind of social engineering methodology that anyone can look up.
Right, yeah, and again, In most of my videos, I do kind of at the end, give my 2 cents, some sort of interpretation of what I've just discussed. But, the end game, the exact motivation, what the agenda for every single event is, who knows? I could be chasing my tail endlessly trying to figure that out. And to a degree, I don't know if it matters.
That's right. You need to move on, right? Once you know it's BS, you need to just drop it.
And that's, more broadly, I try to tailor my videos, both to, an audience that's already, quote, awake, but also make them accessible to people who aren't yet, receptive, to the notion of a faked event, which is why I kind of put the amount of detail into it. I think one issue I have with a lot of videos that are out there is that they kind of take for granted that the viewer, believes all this stuff.
That's right, and that's what you and I were talking about, and that is another reason I wanted to speak with you, because you have such a level-headed delivery that can be advanced or remedial in a way. Maybe not the highest advancement. Point I'm making is it's good for someone who understands what's going on, but it allows those people who aren't quite there to have a rung on the ladder to step on.
Right. If at the very least, if somebody like me, a year or so ago, can watch one of my videos and at least go, okay, something stinks. I don't know if the whole thing's fake, but something stinks. At least, I've pointed somebody in a direction. I don't operate under the delusions that, somebody who's never been exposed to the idea of a hoaxed event is going to watch one of my videos and go, okay, I'm convinced. But at least it can, tip them off that maybe things aren't as they seem. And hopefully maybe they come back and watch a couple more of my videos and start thinking, okay, too much of this doesn't make sense.
That's right. Face it, though, you started from a terrible chant video that I made, and that's what set you on your way. And your videos are there's a very level-headed delivery in your videos, and I truly appreciate that, because, like you mentioned, so many people that are really advanced researchers, they become very jaded for a few reasons, I think. Partially because they understand that all the people who aren't getting this are forcing us all to live in a terrible world. Every person who refuses to consider these things and be part of the majority that allows this to go on, in a way, causes this reality for the rest of us. But what also happens is they've been saying the same thing over and over and over for year after year, and you become jaded, and you lose your patience with people who just don't see it. So I think that's a critical point to make.
Yeah, I agree. Having done it for, my first Brussels video was put up on March 29th. So, I'm 3 months away from a full year of doing, kind of the deconstruction videos that I've been doing. I already find myself getting jaded. Every other day I think, do I want to keep doing this? Especially, you've got some of the trolling that happens in the comment section.
That's right.
I try not to let it get to me. Sometimes it does. I have to convince myself that probably most of these people are, deliberately trolling. It's not some normal person that just happened upon my video.
I got to go defend this bus crash because it's that important to me.
Yeah, or just, or you start seeing the patterns in the types of comments, like, that my cousin's kid was on the bus.
That is the golden fingerprint. I just had someone drop that because I called the warehouse fire, and then they popped off that they lost 3 good friends.
I literally just today had somebody post on the bus one that, I live 6 miles from that school, and, my cousin's kid was, come on. Or even better, when a good friend died, and, it's only been 24 hours, and you're talking to the crazy people on YouTube. Why aren't you, mourning with your friends and family? Why?
Right.
It wouldn't. If I were just a normal person, and somebody I knew and loved died in a real tragedy. I mean, I think literally the last thing I would do would be hop on YouTube.
And so many people fall for it. I used to make fun of those comments by responding like, well, I'd like to offer an apology for my uncle's girlfriend's cousin's sister's nephew, because it is such a fingerprint that this happened with a shark attack that I called out in San Diego. And this now, I don't know if you followed me, but they used a fake shark problem in San Diego to get drones in the air with the lifeguards. But they faked a great white attack, and someone actually went through all this effort to contact me through the higher side chats and all this other stuff to claim that they knew this was real, that they knew it. And I kept standing my ground saying, I recognize fake news. I know what this story is. We don't have a shark problem here. While people can be attacked by sharks, I recognize nonsense when I see it. And as the conversation progressed, it became, I got involved to help ESPN make a more quality account of the death of this noble man. And at that point, I called him out, and they ran like hell. But the fingerprint and the tell is you will never hear people say, that was my brother, that was my mom. It's always my second cousin once removed or my friend's girlfriend. It's a fingerprint. The minute you see it, you can recognize it.
But I mean, you'd think that they'd stop doing that, but then you realize they're not trying to convince the person who made the video. They're trying to dissuade anybody who happens upon the video, hoping to see that comment toward the top of the list.
Right.
Go, oh, okay, it's fake. Okay, never mind. I'll move on. So it's not. They're not trying to convince us. They're trying to convince potential viewers.
And not only that, they're leveraging off your childish emotions. You see, if a person dies in real life, a real person dies, that person is gone. The idea that you can do something to their name or make their memory any worse than it was, or all these things are playing on a child mind. Because the truth is, if really a person died, then really pretty quickly you'll be able to understand that really a person died. But the truth is, just because death is claimed, that is no reason for you to let your childish, emotional mind be manipulated into not challenging it. Because the truth is, we live in a system that is merciless. And it is coming at us every day, and it is turning the majority of people probably into animal farm. The horses and the pigs and the dogs. That's the majority of our society right now. Anyone can read that book. But I wanted to ask you, for a while there, some years ago, when so many of us were standing up and just taking endless flack from trolls, the challenge became to ask people, did anyone die or was anyone hurt? So I'll ask you, was anyone hurt or did anyone die in the bus crash you covered?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. That was they just crushed a bus and leaned it against a tree. Absolutely. Whoever this Jonathan Walker is, I mean, he's probably some convict. They throw his mugshot up and call him the bus driver, but no, I mean, it was a completely fictional event. But he got hurt in that Chattanooga bus crash.
Right. And so that had become, for, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 years ago, that was one of the challenge by the really people that I respect and view as very realized and actually quite a bit further down the road than most people, recognizing what this place is that we live and, what you and I are talking about just being a symptom of it. The challenge, which is why I made that video, became nobody died, nobody got hurt, and that was a way to measure, along with fingerprints like, someone's cousin's brother's sister's dog died. But anyhow, we're at about 45 minutes. Do you want to take a break for a minute and then let me get back and pick up recording in about 10 minutes?
Yeah, if you could, I want to just touch upon a couple real brief things about that bus crash. If we could, before we take the break.
Let's do it.
One thing, and I point this out in the video, in early reporting, after the Chattanooga bus crash, 23 students were taken to the hospital. That number was later bumped to 24, but the initial reports was 23. Well, again, coincidentally, November 21st was a Monday. So Friday, November 18th, there was a bus crash in Nashville. And guess how many students were sent to the hospital? 23. 23 students. You can see the headline. I mean, that by itself, that's an example of the kind of thing where, anybody who's being honest with themselves, I mean, what are the frickin' odds that you'd have 2 bus crashes, 2 nearly identical buses, by the way, both flipping over, one in Tennessee, one in Chattanooga, and they both send the exact same number of students to the hospital? I mean,
boy, they're almost doing the whole Gemini twin story there. So, I mean, how identical were these stories?
Well, the first one, the November 18th one, this was a flip over on either an on-ramp or an off-ramp from an expressway. Nobody died in this one. There were 23 injuries. It didn't get a whole lot of coverage, not like the Chattanooga one did. They really went all out, and they came up with the crazy bus driver story, and kids died, and all sorts of stuff. They made it into a real spectacle that hung around in the news for quite a few days.
Huh.
And it was during the investigation of that crash that I came across the crash from 3 days earlier with the same number of injuries. I mean, it's impossible. My problem now is so many people bring things up. I just don't watch the news anymore. I let very little media gets to pass through my eyeballs. So that's very interesting to me. I would love to see a breakdown, if anyone does it, of the correlation between the two events. I almost, how many days apart were they? 3 days. One was Friday the 18th, one was Monday the 21st.
See, I made a joke that I was seeing if it would catch on about Moon Manson Woodstock, showing the timeline of fraud back in the 60s where they faked the moon landing, and then to get people's eyes off that ball, they were right into the Manson hoax, and then to get people off that, they went straight into Woodstock, which it also did not occur as it was described. I wonder if it's a bit of that going on, where they're just trying to shift the view away.
Or, again, this goes to, what is the end game? What is the motivation? I mean, is it just that 2 cities had the same drill planned, or a similar drill? One had a little bit more backstory to it, which would be the Chattanooga one. I don't know the answer to that question. I just know that, 2 bus crashes happening in the same state 3 days apart with the same number of people getting sent to the hospital.
Right.
I mean, that should all by itself, raise red flags for anybody paying attention. I mean,
it's a bit ironic. Did you know, like in the Marine Corps, if you have an accident, say with a Humvee, or even people on motorcycles that are off duty, and then you have another similar event within like a week, they will stop all use of those vehicles instantly to assess how to address the problem. So it's a bit ironic that would go down with the supposed facilities that are carrying all of our children, and that's just okay in the course of business. But I've got to ask you, did you notice other people breaking down the first of those 2 events like you did? Were there a lot of people who were on that? Do you know?
Offhand, I didn't see a whole lot of coverage of the Nashville crash. I could be mistaken. I mean, certainly there's probably somebody out there, but again, that one didn't get a whole lot of media coverage, so it just may not have crossed anybody's radar. It was the Chattanooga one that got a lot more mainstream media coverage, and that's how it came to my attention.
Yeah, but how much coverage from people like you? How did you see other people breaking it down as a false event in the way you did?
The Chattanooga crash?
Yeah, the first of the 2. Yes, Chattanooga.
Well, there's a channel, Hooked on Your Hoax. He did a brief one. I think there's a couple other channels that did brief ones. I'm not aware of any other channels that kind of went to the level of detail that I did. But I guess, that's kind of my thing. That's why I only put out a video like once every 3 weeks.
How many hits? Do you know how many hits you got on the Chattanooga breakdown you did?
I can tell you.
Because I think probably I mentioned your name at least once on one of my shows in the course of that video being posted.
Yeah, I've got about 6,000 views on that one. I mean, far from going viral. I mean, it's a decent view count.
What's typical for you?
Boy, that's probably in the 2,000 range. So it's definitely getting more attention than my average video. But again, nothing. I mean, I only have 3 videos that are over 10,000 views.
Right, but I would point out though, we have demonstrated that YouTube, the hit count on YouTube is utter nonsense, as is your subscriber count. I was going to do a video this week that showed my analytics to show just statistically how ridiculous my sub counts are. Like, they'll allow me to get 40 or 50, and then in little bite-sized chunks they'll take them all back but 2. This goes on and on and on, and has been going on. I used to gain 1,000 to 2,000 subs a month. I have been in the 60K range forever, but that's kind of beside the point. The hit count is so manipulated, and it's been shown time and time again, and I would suggest that a channel like mine mentions you, that it could well be that a hell of a lot more people viewed your video than you're even seeing in that 6,000.
Yeah, that could be the case. I mean, it's kind of one of those things I have no way of knowing, so I try to just not think about it.
So in the year that you've been doing this, what do you think is the kind of biggest nonsense event that you've witnessed? Clearly there's themes, but I mean, is there one that jumps out at you as being particularly pernicious, kind of mind invasive? Like, I don't know, for me in a way it's Nice.
The Nice truck attack, which I did not cover because, I mean, people were all over that, I mean, instantly. I mean, that may well be the least believable of the high profile events of 2016. I mean, just the idea that a truck could run over, what was the number? I mean, like 100 and some.
Oh, I think we're talking about 2 different events. I'm talking about the kind of. Oh, I'm sorry, I said Nice. I meant the Paris shootings.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
The Paris shootings. Yeah, I mean, those had occurred right, kind of while I was waking up. I hadn't made any videos yet. I didn't do a huge amount of personal research into those. I noticed a few things like, you had these CCTV images that were released from a couple different, bakeries or restaurants or whatever it was. And I noticed that no matter where the camera was, every time the supposed shooting was supposed to be happening, like all this debris was just like all of a sudden appearing in front of the camera. And if you go back and look at them, it's there, and where's this debris? I mean, it's supposed to be, somebody's shooting, so stuff is flying through the air. But I mean, it's not realistic. But no, I mean, plenty of people have done good work on the Paris shootings, and those were pretty sloppy. Honestly, I think the Pulse nightclub was.
Yeah, I agree.
Very sloppy.
The reason I mentioned Paris is because for a while there was footage where there was a supposed police officer laying on the ground, and a terrorist runs up to him with an AK-47 assault rifle, and I forget, shoots once, twice, I don't know, but basically point blank with an assault rifle, and it is so blatantly obvious that you're looking at nonsense that it's hard for me to imagine. And then I began to think about film, because in film they always show someone gets stabbed with a knife and they're incapacitated, which is ridiculous, or someone gets shot and they can still carry on. Someone shoots them with an M16 and they're still able to move around. And I started to think that programming really must be working, because it was basically a cap gun pointed at this cop And it, it was supposed to be an assault rifle, and that's when I really started to realize how programmed people are, because I forget how many hits that video clip that was showing that had, but it was a hell of a lot.
I mean, and again, and I think you left a comment on, well, probably my bus video. I mean, when you look closely, the details, I mean, they just collapse upon themselves. It just, it just doesn't make sense, folks. If you, again, you wouldn't accept these sorts of inconsistencies or bizarre coincidences or things that just don't make sense in your day-to-day lives. You just would not accept it.
No,
if your employer or your girlfriend or your teenage, son or daughter was feeding you bullshit that was, a fraction as ridiculous as the type of stuff we see on the news, you wouldn't fall for it.
No, that's right. And I say over and over that there is not a hoax put in front of us that will not die under the weight of its own details. But therein lies the problem. So many of us, for whatever reason, are just not adults. We don't, we get all this information thrown at us and we absorb it like a sponge, when we should be saying, wait a minute, man, not so fast.
Now, to be fair, I was one of those people, again, a year ago. So I know that people, I understand the point that, you and others make when we, kind of criticize, we like to call them the sheep or the sheeple, but, these are our friends and neighbors and family members. And,
True.
It's a very, the bad guys are doing a good job. I mean, it's hard to blame, people who aren't, quote, awake yet. I mean...
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and the real truth is we need those people. We need those people to join us and become aware and change a lot of minds and change what's going on here. But at the same time, there comes a point when you begin to realize that the likelihood of enough people coming around starts to look like just a snowball's chance in hell. And that's when you start to kind of say, there's so many people out there pointing out the nonsense. How come more of us aren't coming around? But I agree with you. And that's another reason why I appreciate your channel, because your level-headed kind of execution really does give an opportunity for those people who are new to the game.
I mean, for as an example, my mom and dad, who are each in their 70s, I've got them watching my videos, and he watched my dad in particular, watched my first couple Brussels videos, and he just didn't know what to make of it. He's like, well, I think it's just bad reporting, or people trying to make themselves, just kind of. And I said, and I kept making them, and he kept watching, and then by the time I had made 3 or 4 videos on the Brussels, he was starting to come around. He's like, boy, the story just doesn't make sense. And now he's to the point where he's pretty much on my page.
Wow.
And my mom is a little more resistant, but as soon as I point out a couple things, I can see her going, yeah, that just doesn't make sense. I don't know how to argue with you.
Well, it kind of shows you're doing a good job, because one of the tenets that I have lived by to try to keep a level head and try to always force myself to get back to level delivery when you start to drift away and become jaded, is that the older a person is, the harder it's going to be for them to throw away a lifetime of building what they consider a normal day to be. So that's a pretty impressive thing that I just heard from you, for your work to be changing minds of people in their 70s.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it helps. I have a good relationship with my parents, and they trust me. They know I'm not some crazy person, and they can tell I'm putting the research into it. I'm showing real things. I'm showing real inconsistencies in the reporting, real inconsistencies in eyewitness accounts, just nonsensical elements of the various stories. And anybody who, pays attention to the real world knows that things work a certain way. And if anything, tremendously deviates from what is expected, you should start questioning. Whether it's how authorities respond to things, or how eyewitnesses respond to things, or how grieving parents respond to things. We all know how people are supposed to behave under certain circumstances. I mean, one of my favorite, bullcrap criticisms is, everybody mourns differently. Well, no, they don't. Everybody doesn't mourn differently. That's probably pretty predictable. It's predictable enough that when detectives are investigating a real crime, if family members are not behaving the way one would expect them to behave, suspicion is thrown at them. Because, the way people grieve loss is so predictable.
Well, they even have the 5 stages of grief, don't they? That's how predictable it is.
So when you see people getting on TV, 24 hours after their 6-year-old daughter was brutally murdered.
Right.
And able to even form a sentence, let alone, advocate for some cause. I mean, your bullshit detector should be going off.
Heck yeah, and I almost particularly in the bus one you just did, you got to imagine that these people are bought off in some way. These what are often called crisis actors, but clearly you would expect that probably the people pulling off the bus incident must at least live in the area. You would hope. Who knows? Yeah. My point being this. It had occurred to me that they're almost patsies. They're almost being treated like a throwaway person, where if this story does get out of hand, they'll throw that person to the wolf to become the scapegoat. How could you have lied about your own child? That kind of thing.
Right, and maybe that's the case, but, in this particular event, it'd be tough because, you've got one of the mothers claiming that she wrote a letter to the bus driver.
Right.
Which, by the way, if my kids are telling me that they're being, basically tortured by the bus driver, I'm going to walk my ass out and go face to face with that bus driver. I'm not going to write a damn letter.
No, but anyway, I'm just going to put them on the bus every day.
Yeah, I'm going to keep putting them on the bus, but I'm going to write a stern letter. And then, she claims she wrote a letter, and then the principal read the letter out loud to the bus driver in front of the students on the bus. I mean, what? I mean, that's
comedy.
And then the bus driver responds, "I'm going to keep doing it."
Yeah, I do it. I won't. He took a lead.
I'm gonna do it anyway. I mean, this is the principal of the school, and yet just things kept going on. I mean, this was supposed to be like a week or two before the crash. I mean, how anybody can believe that. I mean, especially, I can understand that somebody who's not exposed, just normal people, I can understand how they can fall for it. But, when you've got truthers out there who are buying that, I don't understand it.
Well, in a way, it's been a long time coming. I mean, think back to the Clinton blowjob, think all the way back to when the nation per se is going to lose 2 years of its life on this false event, where supposedly the highest, the most powerful man in the world, as they call him, is having a blowjob in the office to just really begin to lower everyone's expectations. And then we get all the way up to the Trump-Hillary thing, and it's a clown show. And I ask, I've asked in my podcast, what adult listening to this right now, an actual adult in their adult mind, can accept this election as anything but a clown show? And here's the rub, though, because if you think it's problematic or you don't agree with it, yet you still participate in it, then you are giving tacit acceptance to the clown show, and it's a sad thing.
Yeah, the election. I think, going back to my parents, I think this election also contributed to their kind of awakening. I mean, just how just scripted this whole election cycle has been. I think really started to open their eyes even more. I mean, it just the timing of some of these things. It's like an episode of Scandal. I mean, it's like a TV show. I mean, it's impossible to believe.
Yeah, it's beyond.
and I wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about this.
Did you hear my breakdown about the Electoral College?
Yeah, well, refresh my memory. I think I caught at least a piece of it.
I just pointed out that all elections are nonsense, that the Electoral College was actually built to ensure that the same people who have always held power can overrule the popular vote, which has happened 4 times. And actually, I can't think of his name right now. One of the presidents that stole the election with the Electoral College, his descendants are the people who make the Pawn Stars show. The people on Harrison. Yeah. Benjamin Harrison is one of the 4 times when the popular vote was ignored and they seated a president with the Electoral College. But the real tell here is the state of Rhode Island, which is where I am now, refused to participate and said this is fraud, this is nothing more than a backdoor to stealing elections, and we won't participate, which means only 12 of the original 13 colonies created it. So it proves that all elections are a fraud.
Well, I agree that elections are a fraud. I can't speculate how far back. I mean, everybody with the people who think the way I think, use the term, presidents are selected, not elected.
Right.
I believe that's very much true. At this point, I don't believe a mechanism like the Electoral College is required to steal an election, because I don't think it's a legitimate contest to begin with.
That's right. You're making a good point. In other words, I had asked the question of some very educated people here, what role did we play in selecting, the American people play in selecting the candidates before they were ever voted on? You see, like Barack Obama is a good example. How did he get elevated up into the president? Was that a function of what we were doing? And I think you make a good point, because at the end of the day, the media really can shape opinions. And I have quoted people from the Tavistock era stating things like, I could control America if you just simply give me control of TV.
Yeah, I mean, Barack Obama, who, I talk about this in one of my videos. I voted for the guy twice. At the time I was still, I guess I was among the sheep thinking, oh, this guy's going to do good things. But, looking back, he gave the keynote address at the 2004 Democratic Convention, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, is this guy going to be the next president? I mean, it was just
right. I can remember. I remember the first time I ever saw him, and the media was saying, "This brave new upstart, he's possibly presidential."
Yeah, a brand new junior senator from Illinois, and already talking about presidential. So looking back, it's clear as day.
Even to put a finer point on it, some of the researchers that I really respect right now have shown that Trump and Hillary are from the same elite royal family in Scotland. And other people have taken pains to show that there is not a president in anywhere within the modern and sub-modern era that you can't correlate directly to the British royal throne. All right, that brings us to the end of the first hour of episode 36 with Changing Reason, the YouTube channel Changing Reason. We open up in kind of an interesting place. I had done some research not too long ago on Prince, and there was a movie from the 80s that Vanity was in called The Last Dragon. And actually in that movie, there's a big sign on a wall there of one of the places that's integral to the storyline. Actually, it's called The Master. Some dumb goy. It's kind of astonishing to watch anyone who speaks Yiddish be okay with, it's no different than calling a black person a nigger or an Asian person some derisive word like chink or something like this. It's no different to use the word goy for non-Jewish people, and yet there it is, integral to the storyline of The Last Dragon and flaunted in your face. To be complete with when you find out that some dumb goy is actually a computer and not a master at all. He's making fortune cookies, and the fortune cookie that you can see printed out references directly The Wizard of Oz with a comment of something like, those who are colorblind, obviously the dumb boys, should not seek a horse of a different color. Anyhow, I hope you join us for hour 2 over at Crrow777radio.com. Cheers.